In a whirlwind of ambition and betrayal, one man's quest for an heir toppled empires and redrew the map of Europe. Welcome to the epic tale of why Napoleon married twice. Grab a cup of tea, take a seat, and dive into this gripping story. If you're hooked, hit that subscribe button. Your support means the world to us. But hold on, because what started as a passionate romance ended in a shocking divorce that sparked wars and alliances no one saw coming. Now, let's step back to the rugged island of Corsica in 1769, where a boy named Napoleon Bonaparte entered the world just as France seized control of his homeland. Far from the polished courts of Paris, he grew up with a thick accent and a chip on his shoulder, mocked by aristocratic classmates at military school. Yet this scrappy outsider had a mind like a steel trap and a drive that burned hotter than the Mediterranean sun. By his early 20s, the French Revolution's chaos became his proving ground. He crushed royalist uprisings with ruthless precision, earning rapid promotions and a reputation as a tactical genius. It was in this feverish atmosphere, in 1795, that he crossed paths with Josephine de Beauharnais at a glittering Parisian salon. 6 years older, widowed, and a survivor of the guillotine's shadow, Josephine was elegance personified, a stark contrast to the rough-edged soldier. Napoleon fell hard, writing her fervent letters like, "You are the constant object of my thoughts," bearing a vulnerability hidden beneath his military bravado. Their marriage in March 1796 wasn't just a union of hearts, it was a power play. Josephine's connections to revolutionary elites opened doors Napoleon could never have breached alone, securing him command of France's army in Italy. There, he unleashed a string of victories against Austria and Piedmont, using speed and cunning to outwit larger forces. He didn't just win battles, he looted art and treasure to bankroll France's wars while preaching liberty to the conquered. Josephine, though often far from the front, was his emotional lifeline, her letters stoking his ambition. But whispers of her infidelity began to haunt him, fueling his jealousy, and their failure to have children cast a quiet shadow over their bond. This marriage wasn't merely personal, it shaped Napoleon's image, softening his rough edges in the eyes of Paris's elite and paving his path to becoming first consul by 1799 after a bold coup. The story of Napoleon and Josephine's love was the spark that lit an empire. But could it withstand the pressures of power and the absence of an heir? The fire of Napoleon's ambition burned brighter than ever as he crowned himself emperor in 1804. But his marriage to Josephine was fraying under the weight of a single, crushing truth: no heir. The absence of a child to carry his legacy gnawed at Napoleon, now the most powerful man in Europe, whose empire stretched from Spain to the borders of Russia. Josephine, still radiant and beloved by the French court, was his partner in crafting a dazzling imperial image. Her elegance and charm softened his iron-fisted rule. Yet whispers of her past indiscretions and her advancing age, now in her early 40s, fueled doubts about her ability to provide the dynasty he craved. The court buzzed with gossip, and Napoleon's advisors, smelling weakness, began to nudge him toward a harsh reality. An emperor without an heir was an emperor at risk. Dynasties needed bloodlines, and Napoleon, ever the strategist, knew his enemies, both foreign and domestic, could exploit this vulnerability. The stage was set for a decision that would shake not just his marriage, but the entire continent. Napoleon's obsession with securing his legacy wasn't just personal vanity, it was political necessity. By 1807, his empire was a colossus, built on victories like Austerlitz, where he outmaneuvered Austrian and Russian forces in a single day, solidifying his reputation as a military genius. But power like that demanded stability,
and stability demanded a successor. Josephine, despite her efforts to conceive, enduring grueling medical treatments, and even faking a pregnancy scare in 1806, could not deliver. Napoleon, torn between love and duty, began to look elsewhere. His affairs with younger women, like the Polish noblewoman Marie Walewska, weren't just dalliances. They were experiments. When Marie gave birth to his son in 1810, it proved he could father children, shifting the blame squarely onto Josephine. This wasn't a private matter. It was a geopolitical earthquake. Napoleon's advisors, including his cunning foreign minister Talleyrand, urged him to seek a royal bride from a powerful dynasty, one who could cement alliances and produce an heir. The idea of divorce, once unthinkable, now loomed large. The unraveling of Napoleon and Josephine's marriage played out like a tragic opera. In 1809, at the opulent palace of Fontainebleau, Napoleon broke the news to her. The scene was heart-wrenching. Josephine, sobbing, collapsed, begging him to reconsider, while Napoleon, visibly shaken, insisted it was for France's future. He wasn't cruel. He promised her a lavish allowance, the title of Empress Dowager, and her beloved Malmaison estate. But the divorce, finalized in January 1810, was a public spectacle that stunned Europe. Josephine, still adored by the French people, retreated gracefully, but the ripple effects were immediate. Napoleon's enemies, from Britain to Austria, saw the divorce as a sign of instability, while his allies questioned his loyalty to those closest to him. The French public, who had seen Josephine as a stabilizing force, grew uneasy. This wasn't just the end of a marriage, it was the end of an era where love had briefly tempered Napoleon's ambition. Now he turned his gaze to the royal houses of Europe, seeking a bride who could deliver not just a child, but a strategic alliance to secure his empire. The divorce also shifted the balance of power. Napoleon's need for an heir pushed him toward Austria, France's longtime rival. By marrying into the Austrian dynasty, he aimed to legitimize his rule and deter attacks from the east. This decision would pull Austria closer, but it alienated other powers like Russia, who saw Napoleon's ambitions as a growing threat. The divorce, in essence, was a catalyst, setting off a chain of alliances and rivalries that would reshape Europe's borders and spark conflicts that echoed for decades. Josephine, meanwhile, watched from the sidelines, her heart broken, but her dignity intact as Napoleon prepared to wed a new bride.
With Josephine cast aside, Napoleon set his sights on a new bride to secure his empire and produce an heir. His choice wasn't driven by love, but by cold, calculated strategy. In 1810, he zeroed in on Marie Louise, an 18-year-old Austrian archduchess and daughter of Emperor Francis I, head of the powerful Habsburg dynasty. This wasn't just a marriage, it was a diplomatic masterstroke aimed at anchoring Napoleon's empire through a blue-blooded alliance. Austria, a longtime foe humbled by Napoleon's victories at Austerlitz and Wagram, was eager to avoid further conflict. Marrying Marie Louise offered Napoleon legitimacy, tying his upstart Corsican name to one of Europe's oldest royal houses, and a chance to deter attacks from rival powers like Britain and Russia. But this union, forged in the glittering halls of Vienna and Paris, came with a steep price. It reshaped Europe's alliances, sowed distrust among Napoleon's allies, and set the stage for his eventual downfall. Marie Louise was no Josephine. Young, shy, and raised to obey, she was a stark contrast to the sophisticated, charismatic empress who had captivated France. Napoleon, now 40, showered her with affection, writing letters that echoed the passion of his youth, like, "I am consumed with the desire to see you happy." Yet Marie Louise was a reluctant bride, privately terrified of the ogre she'd been taught to fear. Their wedding in April 10, 1910, was a spectacle of imperial grandeur, with Paris draped in banners and feasts lasting days. Napoleon spared no expense, commissioning lavish ceremonies to signal his new legitimacy.
Within a year, Marie-Louise delivered what Josephine could not, a son, Napoleon Francois Joseph Charles, born in March 11, 1811, and dubbed the King of Rome. The birth was a triumph, celebrated with cannon salutes and public festivals across France. Napoleon finally had his heir, a symbol of his dynasty's future. But the joy was fleeting as the marriage's political consequences began to unravel. The alliance with Austria didn't bring the stability Napoleon hoped for. Instead, it stirred suspicion among his allies, particularly Russia. Tsar Alexander I, already wary of Napoleon's dominance, saw the Habsburg marriage as a threat, a sign that France and Austria were forming a bloc against him. This distrust deepened tensions, pushing Russia to strengthen ties with Britain, Napoleon's bitterest enemy. Meanwhile, Marie-Louise struggled to fill Josephine's shoes. The French court, still loyal to their former empress, found the young Austrian cold and aloof. Her heavy accent and reserved nature didn't win hearts like Josephine's charm had. Napoleon, though, was undeterred, doting on his son and parading him as proof of his dynasty's strength. Yet even this victory came with cracks. Marie-Louise's loyalty was tied to Austria, and her father, Emperor Francis, never fully trusted Napoleon, keeping one eye on his own empire's interests. The marriage also shifted Napoleon's focus inward, distracting him from the growing storm beyond France's borders. His obsession with securing his dynasty blinded him to the fragile web of alliances he'd built. By 1812, tensions with Russia boiled over, leading Napoleon to launch his disastrous invasion of Moscow, a campaign that would mark the beginning of his empire's collapse. Marie-Louise, meanwhile, remained a quiet figure, dutifully playing the role of empress, but never truly embracing it. Her presence, meant to stabilize Napoleon's rule, instead highlighted his isolation. The French people missed Josephine's warmth, and Europe's monarchs saw Napoleon's new dynasty as a hollow imitation of their ancient lineages. This marriage, meant to cement his legacy, instead planted the seeds of betrayal and war, pulling Europe into a vortex of conflict that would redefine its future.
Napoleon's marriage to Marie-Louise and the birth of his heir should have been the pinnacle of his power, but instead they marked the beginning of his unraveling. By 1812, the French emperor, emboldened by his new Habsburg alliance and the promise of a dynasty, overreached with a fateful decision to invade Russia. The move was meant to punish Tsar Alexander I for defying his trade blockade against Britain, but it was also a flex of Napoleon's confidence, buoyed by his new status as father to the King of Rome. Marie-Louise, now Empress of the French, remained in Paris, a dutiful but distant figure, raising their son while Napoleon led 600,000 men into the Russian heartland. What followed was a catastrophe that shook his empire to its core, exposing the fragility of his Austrian alliance and setting off a chain reaction that would topple his rule. This wasn't just a military blunder. It was the moment Napoleon's second marriage began to haunt him as Europe's powers turned against him. The Russian campaign was a disaster of epic proportions. Napoleon's Grande Armée, once invincible, was decimated by brutal winter, guerrilla attacks, and the Russians' scorched earth tactics. By December 1812, he limped back to Paris with fewer than 50,000 men, leaving a trail of frozen corpses and shattered dreams. The defeat emboldened his enemies, Britain, Prussia, and even Austria, his supposed ally through Marie-Louise. Her father, Emperor Francis I, saw Napoleon's weakness and began to waver, prioritizing Habsburg interests over family ties. Marie-Louise, meanwhile, was no Josephine. She lacked the political savvy to rally the French court or public in Napoleon's absence. Her youth and inexperience left her isolated, a foreign princess in a nation growing weary of war. The French, who had once cheered Napoleon's triumphs, now whispered about his hubris, and the absence of Josephine's unifying charm was keenly felt. As Napoleon scrambled to rebuild his army in 1813, the cracks in his empire widened. Austria, sensing opportunity, joined the coalition of Britain, Russia, and Prussia against him. Marie-Louise's presence, meant to secure peace with Austria, became a liability. Her homeland's betrayal stung Napoleon deeply. He fought on, winning battles like Dresden, but losing the War of Alliances. By October 1813, the Battle of Leipzig, known as the Battle of Nations, saw Napoleon's forces crushed by a united Europe. Over 500,000 soldiers clashed in the largest battle ever fought on European soil at the time, and Napoleon's defeat forced him to retreat across the Rhine. Marie-Louise, under pressure from her Austrian family, began to waver in her loyalty. She wrote to her father, expressing fear for her son's future, and rumors swirled that she might flee France. Napoleon, desperate to hold his empire together, leaned on her to maintain appearances, but the trust between them frayed. The consequences of this second marriage were now clear. It had failed to secure lasting alliances. Austria's defection proved the Habsburg tie was a hollow promise, and Napoleon's enemies capitalized on his weakened state. By early 1814, Allied armies marched toward Paris, and Napoleon's government crumbled. Marie-Louise, urged by her advisors and her father, fled with her son to Blois, then to Austria, effectively abandoning Napoleon. This betrayal cut deeper than Josephine's divorce. It signaled the collapse of his dynastic dream. The French Senate, once loyal, turned on him, and in April 1814, Napoleon was forced to abdicate, exiled to the tiny island of Elba. Marie-Louise, now under Austrian control, would never return to him, raising their son in Vienna as a Habsburg prince. The second marriage, meant to solidify Napoleon's legacy, instead accelerated his fall, reshaping Europe as his enemies carved up his empire.
Napoleon's exile to Elba in 1814 seemed to mark the end of his saga, but the man who had reshaped Europe wasn't finished. Stripped of his empire, abandoned by Marie-Louise, and separated from his son, he clung to a flicker of defiance. Meanwhile, Josephine, living quietly at Malmaison, remained a lingering presence in his heart and in the minds of the French people. The story of Napoleon's two marriages, one for love, one for strategy, didn't just define his personal life, it rewrote the continent's history, igniting wars, forging alliances, and leaving a legacy that still echoes today. As we unravel the final act, Napoleon's last gambit, the fates of Josephine and Marie-Louise, and the lasting impact of his choices come into sharp focus, revealing how these marriages changed Europe forever. From Elba's rocky shores, Napoleon staged a daring return in March 1815, slipping past British patrols to land in France. The French, disillusioned with the restored Bourbon monarchy, rallied to him, and he reclaimed Paris without firing a shot. This was the 100 Days, a fleeting revival of his empire. But Marie-Louise, now in Vienna under her father's influence, refused to join him. She had embraced her role as a Habsburg duchess, raising their son, now called Franz, far from Napoleon's reach. Her refusal was more than personal. It signaled Austria's final break with Napoleon, solidifying the coalition of Britain, Prussia, and Russia against him. Josephine, though, still held sway over the French imagination. Before her death in 1814 from pneumonia, she had urged Napoleon's supporters to remain loyal, her grace enduring even as her health faded. Her passing, just months before his return, left a void. Napoleon mourned her deeply, visiting Malmaison and keeping her memory alive as a symbol of his early triumphs. Napoleon's final stand came at Waterloo in June 1815. Facing a massive Allied army led by Britain's Duke of Wellington and Prussia's Blücher, he fought with desperate brilliance, but was overwhelmed. The defeat was crushing. Over 70,000 French soldiers fell or fled, and Napoleon's dream of a restored empire shattered. Exiled again, this time to the remote island of St. Helena, he spent his final years reflecting on his marriages. He spoke often of Josephine, calling her his true love, and regretting the divorce that had cost him her stabilizing presence. Of Marie-Louise, he said little, her betrayal a bitter pill. She, meanwhile, thrived in Austria, ruling the Duchy of Parma and marrying a count after Napoleon's death in 1821, erasing her French past.
Their son, raised as a Habsburg, never inherited Napoleon's throne but became a footnote in Austrian nobility, a far cry from the King of the Rome. The ripple effects of Napoleon's marriages reshaped Europe in ways that outlasted him. His divorce from Josephine destabilized his empire's emotional core, alienating the French public and signaling vulnerability to his enemies. The marriage to Marie-Louise, meant to secure peace, instead inflamed tensions with Russia and failed to bind Austria, triggering the coalitions that toppled him. These personal choices fueled political upheavals. The Napoleonic Wars redrew borders, spreading revolutionary ideals of liberty and nationalism that sparked uprisings across Europe, from Germany to Italy. The Congress of Vienna in 1815, convened to restore order, created a new balance of power, with stronger monarchies and a unified German confederation, all born from the chaos Napoleon's ambitions unleashed. His marriages, one rooted in passion, the other in cold ambition, didn't just build and break his empire, they planted the seeds for modern Europe, where nations began to define themselves by shared identity rather than royal dynasties. As we close this tale, Napoleon's story is a reminder that even the mightiest fall when personal and political collide. His love for Josephine gave him France's heart. His union with Marie-Louise cost him its trust. If this journey through history gripped you, hit that like button, subscribe, and comment below. Tell us, would you have stood with Napoleon or joined his foes? Your support means everything to us, and we'd love to bring you more epic stories like this one. Napoleon's marriages didn't just change his life, they changed the world.